So with the rise of social business platforms, are we slowly but surely saying goodbye to the organisational chart? Is that what's going on here, Dave?
It would seem so, and but you and I wouldn't be the first to herald the end of the org chart. Back in '99, Henry Mintzberg and Ludo van der Hey talked about something called an organograph, and
Yes.
they pointed to some of the challenges with a traditional org chart. Their organograph contained a couple of things actually. It contained what they called sets, people, and chains, connections between people. And they describe an organograph was more organic, as the name would suggest, and they had webs and
Tended to focus on process, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, process, but the relationships between what they called sets was very, very fluid, right? So if you think about what an org chart is it's very structured. We've got a pyramid-like structure. It's hierarchical. Information flows up, and decisions flow down, right? That's what an org chart's communicating. It also contains sets. It's got people. It also contains chains. It's got connections, but they're used in a very limited way. And really, what Van der Hey and Mintzberg were talking about back then was the social graph, right? Because if we look at a social graph, it most naturally represents what's going on in an organisation, and they're really simple, right? So. We don't call them sets in social graph. We call them what do we call them?
Nodes and edges.
Nodes and edges. There's just a node and an edge, and they can be connected in various ways. And nodes. Let's take a look at a single node. If it's got lots of edges and they're outward, that tends to be referred to as out degree by graph theorists. That suggests that somebody's gregarious, right? And if you've got a node with lots of inward edges in degree, we think of that tells us that the node is popular, right? So that's that's Lady Gaga on Twitter, right? That's many hundreds, if not small millions, of followers.
And in a business context, are we talking about degrees of influence in an organisation? Is that what's going on here? As opposed to popularity, are we talking? These are people who other colleagues regard as being knowledgeable on these particular areas?
Yeah, well, the social graph's been popularised by Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So that connection we tend to think of as friend, in quotes, whatever that means. But of course, we've got lots of connections in a business context. There are, they are perhaps friends, people that we carried out our induction with. They might be people that we share information with. They might be people that we engage with. They might be people that we share decision-making processes with. And all of that's being tracked and recorded by a social graph in a way that is very natural, right? And that's the point of the social graph. It's simple and it's most natural. It most accurately represents the way people interact.
And of course, it's transparent, right? It's accessible to everyone. I mean, I like the idea, I read somewhere, where you're talking about in this new world, a young engineer, I don't know, fresh out of Cambridge or Imperial, wherever, joins an organisation. They're into green technology, let's say.
Yeah.
He's got some wonderful ideas. He's been working on in his PhD thesis or whatever. He brings them to the company. Suddenly, he's the most popular guy in the organisation. His papers are more downloaded than anybody else. His voice is getting more cut through than anyone else. Does this undermine or replace the org chart? What's going on here?
Well, it's visible for the first time,
yeah,
isn't it? Because we all kind of know the way work really gets done in our organisation. We've just never been able to see it before. And there's a couple of guys, Rob Cross and Andrew Parker, who developed a technique, and what they did, and only back in 2004, 2005, they published their work. And what they did is they went along to organisations, they interviewed people, and when they interviewed somebody, they drew a circle, and then they drew the lines that connected them to the other people in the organisation. So it's a painstaking manual process. And what they did is that they identified people that were influential in organisations, people that were bottlenecks, perhaps people that were maybe even plain overworked. That was manual, right? And it was partial because there are only so many people you can interview, only so many lines you can manually draw. But if you're working with an enterprise social tool today,
that's automated now, effectively, isn't it?
Exactly.
And it's instant.
It's there.
Which surely, who are the winners and losers then in this? Sure, I can already begin to see why, captains of industry, CEOs, the list goes on of companies that have now embraced social business, from McKinsey to PwC to, RBS, TD Bank, and every day there's another big organisation trying to move away from email and embracing this. But interestingly, who are the losers, or what roles are changing as a result of this?
I think, is it winners or losers? I mean, it's a great question, but I think we're seeing a change for sure. So we're seeing the way organisations work represented in a new reality. Visually we can see it. We've got data on it, and that will change and influence the way organisations truly work. I mean, we've seen some early work with social graphs that have been constructed manually, or they've been constructed through an analysis of telephone calls or emails, and that what they've tried to do is work out how they can restructure an organisation. Okay,
maybe I'm being a bit coy here. Speaking as somebody who's done or did 7 years in corporate world, and then the dot-com revolution came along and I went agency side and never looked back, I'm excited about this new influence chart, if you like. I like the idea that somebody can join a company with ideas and they're time date stamped. They belong to that person. They cannot be purloined by management. And I guess what I'm getting at, Dale, here is the role of middle management going to have to change with the rise of
very much
the
so?
influence chart?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So management changes, right? So all of this is challenging what managers do today. If we think about a traditional mid-level executive or manager, social tools are first and foremost, they're automating some of what entry-level managers do, right? If you think about an entry-level manager, they're a supervisor, they perhaps coordinate, they organise work for others. Much of what social tools inside the organisation do today is automate all of that, right? So there's one thing we don't expect of entry-level managers anymore.
You're going to scare a lot of managers with this talk, Dale. What are they going to do now?
Well, they still have a role to play, but it is changing. The management and hierarchical org charts are problematic, right? Because in those two things are implied status, power, hierarchy, and they're problematic for most businesses. They're as much a motivation they're as much a demotivation as they are a motivation. What management becomes is much more about it's much more about facilitating, coordinating, enabling. Right. That's exactly right. And if it's about getting the best out of others, enabling people to do their best work, the allocation of resources. It turns management around to less about power and status, more about more
solving problems.
Yeah.
So you'd say that an enlightened middle manager would embrace a social business platform as a way of actually seeing where the talent is in an organisation and bringing those people together to solve problems. Or challenges.
We absolutely. You're right, Rooven. We absolutely see that in enlightened organisations today. If we look at W.L. Gore, for example, the individual contributors will hire the managers. Effectively, they choose the managers, right? And the managers are accountable to the individual contributors.
Right. Now, again, I can see a lot of senior executives having problems with this and thinking that's a very laborious process if you're going to consult with everybody about every decision that's made in an organisation. Well, what's your response to that?
On this journey, we've seen that question asked a lot of times. If what we're going to do is run our organisation in a way that decisions are inclusive, and that by definition means we're going to involve more people in the decision-making process, then isn't that going to take a long time? Isn't that going to be tiresome, laborious? And the reality today, though, is that those people, those organisations that are not working in that way are investing much more time in selling the decision after it's made. So, in a traditional organisation, if you will, a decision gets made behind closed doors, very often with a small group. That's the way in which the more strategic decisions are made.
And everyone in the company says, why did they make that decision? We don't know.
Right, and you're absolutely right. And what does that mean, right? What does that do to the motivation of the individuals in the organisation that are expected to carry out the decision, right?